Hello, my name is Alan Young and I'm here at the 40th anniversary meeting of the British Association for Psychopharmacology, currently being held in Cambridge, and I'm in discussion with Dr. Clare Stanford. Dr. Stanford, Clare, if I may, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. And I'd like to start off by asking you to explain a bit about your current role and position professionally and the wider scope of things that you do.
I'm currently a reader at University College London in what was the Department of Pharmacology, but is now a part of a very large division which includes neuroscience and physiology. And I have quite a large teaching obligation and carry most of the psychopharmacology for the medics, science students who used to go and work in the pharmaceutical industry, and people doing other subjects who are interested in psychopharmacology, or related to psychology, that sort of thing.
So that sounds like a busy work life.
It is. It has to be done in conjunction with research, of course.
And tell us about your current research.
The moment we're studying a mouse which we believe has ADHD.
Oh, wow.
It's a mutant mouse that was supposed to behave like normal mice that had been given an antidepressant. And that's why we got interested in it, because I've always carried out research on the neurobiology of antidepressants. And it became clear fairly soon that what we were finding about the neurobiology of this mouse simply wasn't consistent with antidepressant. And what made us start to think about ADHD was, for reasons I won't bore you with, we gave it amphetamine.
Oh, right.
And we expected either this mouse, which we knew to be hyperactive already, the amphetamine would make it more hyperactive, or it would already be at a ceiling. And in fact, what happened was they curled up in the corner of the cage with a good book. And that made us think we weren't looking at antidepressants anymore, and methylphenidate did the same thing. And we logged all the research findings we had to date and boned up on the literature on ADHD and found virtually a perfect match. So since then we've been validating the model, challenging it with other drugs used to treat ADHD, learning more about the neurobiology and so forth. And it also led to a human study on DNA from ADHD patients, where they found a strong association for polymorphisms in the equivalent gene in humans with ADHD.
Right, fascinating.
As far as I know, it's certainly one of the first, if not first, study where a discovery in mice has led to a discovery in humans.
Fascinating, fascinating. If I could just go back a bit, and if I could take you perhaps back to the beginning of your career, and you could tell me a little bit about why you came into this whole field.
I was doing a DPhil in Oxford on the regulation of neurons in the brain that release noradrenaline, and how they respond to increased activation by naturalistic stimuli like stress and so forth. And we were using drugs as a way of manipulating the function of these neurons to see how they reacted, how the rate of synthesis of noradrenaline increased, how the rate of release was regulated. And I became more interested in the drugs than the neurons, as it were. And around that time, Vetulani and Salsa produced their landmark paper suggesting that chronic administration of antidepressants downregulates beta-adrenoreceptors.
Oh yes, I remember it well.
It was a landmark, because until then, pharmacologists had been studying the response to an acute drug challenge. And that paper showed that pharmacologists had actually been looking at the wrong thing all the time. The finding itself turned out to be a red herring, but I think it changed the whole way we do research. And so I then became even more interested in long-term adaptive changes in noradrenergic neurons and how they might affect mood and behaviour generally.
Fascinating. And of course you've seen a lot of change in antidepressants over the years, but sometimes we hear that the fundamental pharmacology hasn't really changed, it's just been tinkered with.
I think that's probably true. There have been many Me Too drugs. I mean, I always tell my students that the monoamine theory of depression is dead in the water. I mean, it's been dead for 30 years. But the monoamine theory of antidepressant is actually alive and kicking. So all the drugs we have that are effective in the clinic, in one way or another, target central monoamines. And I think we're still cherry picking. We're still looking around monoamines, because the next pharmacological hurdle, I really strongly believe, are the peptides. They're the chemicals that regulate the monoamines. And that transition is difficult. The chemistry is difficult. Pharmacokinetics are even more difficult. But until we get there, I mean, small molecules are beginning to arrive in the clinic. And I think when they follow through in larger numbers, and I think we're going to see a resurgence in the interest in psychopharm.
Of course. If I could just change the focus of our discussion to the BAP, you've been involved in the BAP in many different roles. You're a past president and you're a member of the governance committee. Can you tell us how you first became involved in the BAP?
Yes, my early days, I went to physiological society meetings, and I found that those meetings were becoming far more reductionist. You know, they were interested more and more in molecules and ion channels and so forth. So I migrated to PharmSoc, and more or less the same thing happened to Pharmacological Society. The whole animal work and behaviour in particular is regarded as terribly old-fashioned. And I started coming to BAP and found that it was just full of people who were interested in the same things as me. And it was a real tonic. It still is, actually.
Yes, I mean, it's been mentioned many times that the BAP has a tripartite structure with basic scientists, clinician scientists and industry. But really, people from those three camps have commonalities across all of those areas. And so you're really speaking to like-minded souls. Has that been your impression over the years?
Oh, absolutely. And it's like an amoeba that some topics are much more have an industrial influence, but I actually find the clinical input terribly valuable. Obviously, I never go anywhere near a patient, but I teach medical students, and I think you can always tell the people who've simply read the textbook to give a lecture. You don't necessarily tell the students about all the things you know about through going to BAP meetings, but it's terribly important that you know what clinicians are worried about, what's on the wish list for clinicians, where the field is going next, so that you can teach students with confidence and know that you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, personally, as a clinician, I feel you don't really know about a drug until you've used it in a number of patients yourself, because there's extra that can always be learned. Absolutely,
and it's so hard to access that information. It's hard enough to keep up with the science literature. You can't keep up with the clinical literature in any way. We're not really qualified to interpret it properly. We're not clinicians, but the conversations at BAP fill those gaps.
And the BAP has also been very helpful to clinicians in providing guidelines, which have been very influential. And it's also been very helpful to basic scientists in providing various courses and certificates. You've been involved in those over the years. I wonder if you'd just like to talk about those briefly.
Yes, indeed. In fact, Charles Marsden and I initiated the series. And really that came out of a change in attitude to animal experiments. The late 90s, early 2000s, it was really hitting a crisis. And it was clear that things couldn't go on the way they were.
Yes.
And one of the gaps that needed to be filled was a much greater awareness of the context of the experiments that people were doing, not simply the scientific context, but the welfare context, the ethical context. People needed help designing experiments properly. They needed help in the latest techniques for analysing data. And also, I think laboratory scientists tend to forget about pharmacokinetics. That works very well in test tubes can be completely different when you bung them into a whole human being.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there just seemed to be plenty of scope for running a dozen modules or so covering these topics, not telling people what to do and how to do it, but telling people the things they need to think about before they even start to design their experiment. And when to hit the alarm button, when they should go and ask someone, rather than just press on, keeping their fingers crossed. You know.
Well, I think if you say many basic scientists are neglectful of pharmacokinetics, many clinicians have yet to discover pharmacokinetics. So, I'd just like to ask you about the future. First of all, about the broad field. I mean, we face lots of challenges. The pharmaceutical industry withdrawing, and we get proportionately less funding for research than really we should because of the vast impact of these illnesses. What's your feeling about the future for psychopharmacology?
Well, it looks difficult at the moment. I'm sure there'll be a research. With fields like this, it normally just takes one landmark success for a field to burgeon again. And I think psychopharmacology needs that quite badly at the moment. You could say that progress has been very slow. You could say antidepressants have been more or less in the doldrums. Nothing new that's really perked people up has happened. So we need that revival of interest.
But leap forward, really. Yes.
Exactly. But I think the other thing that needs to happen, that's a real worry, is public confidence in the drugs we use. There's been a great deal of conversation at this meeting about why do so many people say that psychotropic drugs don't work and that they're a pharmaceutical hoax and so forth. And in a way, that's our fault. We really need to confront that head on and more public engagement to bring the public alongside. I teach my students, one of the papers I show them is that in a household study, people generally think that taking vitamins is better, more effective, and less harmful than taking antidepressants. So we've got a real mountain to climb there. Public support goes a long way in driving research. You've only got to look at cancer research, the British Heart Foundation. They've not only got the moral pressure from the general public, but the general public pour huge amounts of money into developing progress. And mental health actually doesn't have that. I did a survey of the top 500 charities by income in terms of their research interests. And of course, cancer and heart disease are in the top 5. Collectively, all the charities that fund neurological diseases are bumping along at 40 or 50. And the Mental Health Foundation is the only charity that I reach that funds mental research at all, apart from MRC and Wellcome, for instance. And their combined income was about a quarter of that of the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. It's stigma attached to mental health, I think, which is another impediment to public support and research for that field.
So there's great scope for change, really.
Yes, and it's up to us to do something about it.
If I could turn to the future, you've outlined some of the challenges, really, for our field. What about the future of the BAP? This is the 40th anniversary meeting, tremendously successful meeting, bursting at the seams with good science, but also bursting at the seams with very bright young researchers who've come not just from Britain, but from all over the world. Does that harbinger well for the future? Does that bode well for the future?
Oh, absolutely. When I first joined the BAP, it was more like a club, actually, and it ticked along very nicely. And over the 25, 30 years I've been involved, the professionalism is remarkable. The talks are extremely high quality. And as you say, it's got this international profile, but I think research in the UK generally is becoming much more international. University recruits are not predominantly British anymore, come from all over the world, which is an excellent exchange of ideas and expertise.
Well, I think we'll round up there, but Dr. Clare Stanford, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.